On her first morning at her dream company, Amanda, a poor college student who had just won a prestigious internship, was only steps from the building entrance when a sudden gust of wind lifted her skirt, exposing her white underwear to the crowd. Face burning, she clutched the fabric and rushed inside, believing no one important had witnessed the disaster. But across the street, CEO Charles stood frozen, watching every second. Would that fateful wind destroy or open a new life for them both? Amanda pressed her back against the cool glass wall inside the Westbrook Industries lobby, heart hammering against her ribs. The mortification still burned across her cheeks. She could feel the phantom sensation of fabric lifting, the horrifying exposure, the eyes of strangers on the street. Her hands trembled as she smoothed down her skirt for the 100th time, as if the gesture could erase what had just happened. She had worked 3 years for this. 3 years of late nights in the university library, of skipping meals to save money, of wearing the same interview outfit she'd bought second-hand and altered herself. The acceptance email from Westbrook Industries had felt like a miracle. A full summer internship at one of the most prestigious firms in the city. A chance to prove she belonged somewhere beyond the cramped apartment she shared with 2 roommates. Beyond the neighborhood where opportunity came to die. And now, on her first day, before she'd even walked through the doors, she'd given the universe a perfect reason to send her back where she came from. Amanda forced herself to breathe. No one important had seen. Just strangers on the street, people she'd never meet again. She straightened her shoulders and walked toward the elevators, her worn heels clicking against the marble floor. The building stretched 30 floors above her, all steel and glass and ambition. She rode the elevator to the 15th floor where the summer interns had been instructed to gather. The doors opened to a bright conference room already filled with other young people, all of them looking sharp and confident in ways that made Amanda's second-hand blazer feel even cheaper. She found a seat near the back and tried to make herself invisible. Across the city, Charles Westbrook sat in his corner office on the 30th floor, staring at nothing. His assistant had brought him coffee 20 minutes ago. It sat untouched on his desk, growing cold. He couldn't stop seeing her face, the girl on the street. The way she'd frozen when the wind caught her skirt, the flush of humiliation that had colored her skin. But more than that, the way she'd recovered. No tears, no running away in defeat. She'd grabbed the fabric, lifted her chin, and walked into the building like she owned it. Charles had spent 7 years building Westbrook Industries from nothing into something that mattered. 7 years of discipline, of calculated risks, of saying no to everything that wasn't the mission. He'd learned early that sentiment was expensive, distraction was fatal. His ex-wife had taught him that lesson well. They'd married young, when he was still clawing his way up, when the company was just an idea and a loan he couldn't afford. She'd smiled through the lean years, through the 70-hour weeks, through the tiny apartment and the second-hand furniture, right up until the day she told him she'd met someone else. Someone established. Someone who could give her the life she deserved. The divorce papers had arrived the same week he'd landed his first major contract. She'd left him with Emma, his daughter. 7 years old now, with her mother's dark eyes and his stubborn jaw. The only thing in his life that felt real. This morning, he'd been walking Emma to school, her small hand warm in his, when he'd seen the girl across the street. Emma had tugged his sleeve and asked why the lady looked so scared. Charles hadn't known how to answer. He'd just stood there, watching, as something he couldn't name stirred in his chest. He shook his head and turned back to his computer. Sentiment was expensive. He had work to do. The intern orientation lasted 2 hours. Amanda absorbed every word, took notes in the margins of the folders they'd been given, memorized names and titles and reporting structures. When they were dismissed for a tour of the building, she followed the group through corridors that smelled like expensive coffee and printer toner. Their guide, a friendly woman from Human Resources, explained the company's structure as they walked. Westbrook Industries specialized in sustainable technology consulting. They worked with corporations trying to reduce their environmental impact without destroying their bottom line. It was innovative work, important work, The kind of work Amanda had dreamed about doing since she'd first understood that the world needed fixing. The tour ended in a large conference room on the 20th floor. Through the windows, the city spread out below them, all glass towers and distant water. A man in a gray suit stood at the head of the table. He introduced himself as the director of the summer program and explained that they'd be splitting into project teams. Each team would work on a real client case. At the end of the summer, they'd present their findings to the executive leadership. Amanda's pulse quickened. This was real. This was her chance. The director began outlining the first case. A mid-sized manufacturing company was hemorrhaging money on energy costs. Their equipment was outdated, their processes inefficient. The client wanted solutions that wouldn't require shutting down production. Around the table, the other interns shifted in their seats. A few whispered to each other. Amanda's mind was already working through the problem, pulling together threads from her economics classes, from the engineering courses she'd audited, from the case studies she'd devoured in her free time. The director asked if anyone had initial thoughts. Silence filled the room. Amanda felt her heart beating in her throat. She was just an intern, the lowest person in this building. She should stay quiet, learn her place, wait her turn. But the answer was right there, clean and obvious and elegant. Her hand rose before she could stop it. Every head in the room turned toward her. The director raised his eyebrows. Amanda's voice came out steadier than she felt. She explained that the client didn't need to replace all their equipment at once. They could implement a phased retrofit system, upgrading one production line at a time. Partner with an energy company for upfront financing. The energy savings would pay for the upgrades within 18 months, and after that, pure profit. Lower risk, faster implementation, better optics for the client's shareholders. The room stayed quiet. Amanda's courage faltered. Maybe she'd overstepped. Maybe she'd said something stupid. Maybe everyone could see exactly what she was. A girl from nowhere pretending she belonged. Then the director smiled. He said it was a solid approach. Unconventional, worth exploring. Amanda exhaled. The meeting continued. Teams were assigned. Amanda found herself placed on the manufacturing case, along with 5 other interns who looked at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to resentment. They were dismissed. Amanda gathered her folder and stood, relief washing through her. She'd survived the first day. That was enough. She was halfway to the elevator when someone called her name. Amanda turned. A woman stood in the hallway behind her. Tall, polished, with dark hair pulled into a sleek bun and a tailored dress that probably cost more than Amanda's rent. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. The woman introduced herself as Vanessa, executive assistant to Charles Westbrook. She said the director had been impressed by Amanda's contribution in the meeting. She said opportunities like this didn't come along often for people in Amanda's position. The words were kind. The tone was not. Vanessa's gaze traveled down Amanda's outfit, lingering on the frayed hem of her skirt, the scuffed heels, the blazer with its slightly mismatched buttons. Amanda felt herself shrinking under the scrutiny. Then Vanessa smiled again and said she looked forward to seeing what Amanda could do. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking precisely against the floor. Amanda stood alone in the hallway, the victory of the meeting already curdling in her stomach. She didn't know that 30 floors above her, Charles Westbrook was reading the report from the intern orientation. She didn't know that when he reached the section about the manufacturing case, he stopped. She didn't know that he read her name twice, then pulled up her application file and stared at her photo for longer than he should have. She didn't know that he recognized her immediately. The girl from the street, the one who hadn't cried. Charles closed the file and told himself to focus. But his mind kept drifting back to her face, to the way she'd stood in that moment of humiliation and chosen dignity over defeat. He hadn't felt anything like interest in years, not since his ex-wife had left, not since he'd learned that opening yourself to another person just gave them ammunition to destroy you. But something about this girl had gotten under his skin. Charles picked up his phone and dialed his director of operations. When the man answered, Charles gave him instructions. Simple. Direct. The manufacturing case team needed stronger leadership. He wanted someone unconventional heading the project, someone hungry, Someone with something to prove. He wanted Amanda. The director hesitated. She was just an intern, barely 3 hours into her first day. Putting her in charge would raise questions. Charles said he didn't care about questions. He cared about results. Make it happen. He ended the call and returned to his work, ignoring the small voice in his head that whispered he was making a mistake. That sentiment was expensive. That he was breaking his own rules, but he couldn't shake the image of her. Wind in her hair, chin lifted, walking forward anyway. Amanda was halfway home on the subway when her phone buzzed. An email from the director. She almost didn't open it, assuming it was just a recap of the day's information. Then she saw the subject line, Project Leadership Assignment. Her hands shook as she read. Effective immediately, she was being appointed team leader for the manufacturing case. The director cited her initiative and strategic thinking. He said the executive team had specifically requested her for the role. Amanda read the email 3 times, certain she'd misunderstood. This didn't happen. Not to girls like her. Not on the first day. But the email was real. The words didn't change no matter how many times she read them. She got off at her stop in a daze, walked the 4 blocks to her apartment building, climbed the 3 flights of stairs. Her roommates were out. The apartment was quiet. Amanda sat on her bed and finally let herself feel it. The terror, the disbelief, the tiny, fragile spark of hope. Maybe she did belong here after all. Across the city, Charles picked up Emma from her after-school program. His daughter chattered about her day, about the boy who'd shared his crackers at snack time, about the drawing she'd made in art class. Charles listened with half his attention, the other half still circling back to the decision he'd made. He'd crossed a line today. He knew it. Choosing Amanda for the leadership role wasn't entirely about her qualifications. It was about something else. Something he didn't want to examine too closely. Emma tugged his hand and asked if he was listening. Charles looked down at his daughter and smiled. He said of course he was listening. He always listened to her. Emma accepted this easily, the way children do. She skipped beside him as they walked toward his car, but Charles couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just set something in motion that he wouldn't be able to control. That the girl from the street was going to change everything, whether he wanted her to or not. He told himself it didn't matter. He'd given her an opportunity. What she did with it was up to her. But deep down, he already knew he'd be watching, waiting, hoping she'd prove him right. The whispers started on Amanda's 3rd day. She arrived early, as always, carrying the coffee she'd made at home in a travel mug because the lobby cafe charged $7 for a latte she couldn't afford. The other interns on her team were already gathered around the conference table, their conversation stopping abruptly when she walked in. Amanda set down her bag and pulled out her notes. She'd spent the previous evening mapping out a project timeline, breaking down the manufacturing analysis into manageable phases. When she looked up, 5 pairs of eyes were watching her with expressions she couldn't read. One of them, a guy named Derek who'd gone to Princeton, finally spoke. He said it was interesting how quickly Amanda had been promoted. He said opportunities like that usually went to people with connections. Amanda felt heat creeping up her neck. She told him she didn't have connections. She had an idea that the director thought was worth pursuing. Derek smiled, but it wasn't friendly. He said, of course, that must be it. He exchanged a glance with the girl sitting next to him, and they both looked away. The meeting proceeded in uncomfortable silence. Amanda presented her timeline, assigned tasks, tried to project confidence she didn't feel, but she could sense the resistance in the room, the skepticism, the unspoken question hanging over everything. Who did she think she was? When the meeting ended, Amanda stayed behind to organize her materials. Through the glass wall of the conference room, she could see Derek and 2 others standing by the elevators. They weren't being quiet. Derek's voice carried across the open floor plan as he told the others that Amanda must have done something special to catch the CEO's attention, that girls like her always found a way to get ahead. Amanda's hands stilled on her notebook. The words landed like punches. She'd worked for this. She'd earned this, but nobody wanted to believe that. It was easier to assume she'd cheated somehow, that she'd used something other than her brain to get where she was. The worst part was not knowing how to fight it. Defending herself would only make her look guilty. Ignoring it would let the rumors spread. She gathered her things and left the conference room, keeping her head down as she passed Derek's group. Their laughter followed her to the elevator. 30 floors above, Charles stood at his office window and told himself he wasn't looking for her. The building across the street was having construction done. He was just observing the progress. The fact that his eyes kept drifting to the lobby entrance was coincidental. Vanessa knocked and entered without waiting for permission, the way she always did. She set a stack of contracts on his desk and mentioned that the intern program was generating some interesting dynamics. She said Amanda's promotion had raised eyebrows. People were talking. Charles turned from the window. He asked what people were saying. Vanessa's smile was sharp. She said people wondered about the selection criteria, about whether merit was really the deciding factor. She said it was natural for questions to arise when someone with Amanda's background suddenly found herself in a leadership position. The implication was clear. Charles felt anger rising in his chest, but he kept his voice level. He told Vanessa that Amanda had earned her position through her work, that anyone who had a problem with that could bring their concerns directly to him. Vanessa's smile didn't waver. She said, of course. She was just making him aware of the office climate. She knew he valued transparency. After she left, Charles sat at his desk and tried to focus on the contracts, but his mind kept returning to the conversation, to the poison Vanessa had been spreading, to the fact that his decision to promote Amanda had painted a target on her back. He'd wanted to give her an opportunity. Instead, he might have destroyed her credibility before she'd even had a chance to prove herself. The thought bothered him more than it should have. That evening, Charles came home to find Emma sitting at the kitchen table, her homework spread out in front of her. The babysitter was cleaning up dinner dishes. Charles thanked her, paid her, and watched her leave before sitting down next to his daughter. Emma looked up from her math worksheet. She asked if the scared lady was okay. Charles felt something tighten in his chest. He asked what scared lady. Emma reminded him. The lady from this morning. The one whose dress flew up. She said the lady had looked so embarrassed, and Emma had been thinking about her all day. She wondered if the lady was sad. Charles looked at his daughter's concerned face and felt his carefully constructed walls begin to crack. He told Emma the lady was probably fine, that sometimes embarrassing things happened, but people were stronger than they looked. Emma considered this. Then she said she wished she could tell the lady that it was okay, that everybody trips or falls or has their dress fly up sometimes, that it didn't mean she wasn't brave. Charles asked why Emma thought the lady was brave. Emma said because she walked into the building anyway, even though she was scared. Emma said that was the bravest thing someone could do. Out of the mouths of children, Charles thought. He reached over and ruffled his daughter's hair, then helped her finish her homework. But Emma's words stayed with him long after she'd gone to bed. 3 days later, Amanda was working late in the small office the interns shared when Emma appeared in the doorway. Amanda looked up, startled. The little girl stood there in a school uniform, backpack still on her shoulders, looking uncertain but determined. Amanda asked if Emma was lost. Emma shook her head. She said her dad was in a meeting on this floor and she'd been waiting in the hallway. But then she'd seen Amanda through the glass and recognized her. She said she'd wanted to say hello. Amanda's mind raced. This was Charles's daughter, the same little girl who'd witnessed her humiliation. Heat crept up her neck, but she forced herself to smile. She invited Emma to come in and sit down. Emma dropped her backpack and climbed into the chair next to Amanda's desk. She looked at the papers spread everywhere and asked if Amanda was doing homework. Amanda explained it was work for a project. A big, important project. Emma said her dad did important projects too. She said he worked very hard and sometimes forgot to eat lunch. She asked if Amanda forgot to eat lunch too. The question was so earnest that Amanda laughed. She admitted that yes, sometimes she did. Emma pulled a granola bar from her backpack and offered it to Amanda. She said her dad always made her pack extra snacks, and she wanted to share. Amanda felt something warm spread through her chest. She accepted the granola bar and thanked Emma seriously, as if receiving a great gift. They sat together for a few minutes, Emma chattering about her school day while Amanda listened. The little girl mentioned that her mom lived far away and didn't visit much. She said it was usually just her and her dad, which was good because he was the best dad ever. But sometimes she wished she had a mom too. The confession was delivered matter-of-factly, without self-pity, but it made Amanda's throat tight. Before she could respond, Charles appeared in the doorway. He looked surprised to find his daughter there. Then his eyes landed on Amanda, and something complicated passed across his face. Charles asked Emma what she was doing. Emma explained that she'd found the nice lady from the street and was keeping her company so she wouldn't be lonely. Charles's expression softened. He told Emma it was time to go home. The little girl hugged Amanda goodbye, made her promise to eat the granola bar, then skipped out into the hallway. Charles lingered in the doorway. He apologized for the intrusion. Amanda told him there was nothing to apologize for. That Emma was wonderful. Charles said she got that from her mother. Then he corrected himself, said that wasn't true, that Emma got it from being herself, that she had a gift for seeing the good in people. The conversation felt weighted. Amanda wasn't sure what to say. Charles asked if she had plans for dinner. His voice was casual, but his eyes weren't. Amanda admitted she didn't. Charles said Emma had been asking about her all week, wondering if the scared lady was okay. He said if Amanda wasn't opposed to the idea, they'd both like to take her to dinner. Nothing fancy, just pizza. A thank you for being kind to his daughter. Amanda knew she should say no. Every instinct screamed that this was a line she shouldn't cross, but she found herself saying yes. They went to a neighborhood pizza place Emma loved. The little girl sat between them in the booth, talking non-stop about everything and nothing. Charles was different outside the office. Relaxed, present. He made Emma laugh with silly voices and listened to her stories with complete attention. Amanda watched them together and felt something shift inside her. This wasn't the cold CEO from the office. This was a father who loved his daughter more than anything, a man who'd built walls to protect what mattered most. After dinner, Charles drove Amanda home. Emma had fallen asleep in the back seat, her head resting against the window. Charles walked Amanda to her building entrance, and they stood there in the soft evening light. Charles said he'd heard about the rumors, about what people were saying about Amanda's promotion. Amanda's stomach dropped. She told him she could handle it. Charles said he knew she could, that he'd watched her handle impossible things already, but he wanted her to know he regretted putting her in this position, that he'd made the decision to promote her for the right reasons, but he hadn't considered how it would look to others. Amanda told him the opportunity was real. The burden was other people's assumptions, and that wasn't his fault. Charles was quiet for a moment. Then he said it was his fault, that he'd chosen her partly because of her qualifications, but also because he couldn't stop thinking about her, about the girl on the street who'd chosen dignity over defeat. He said he'd been drawn to her from that first moment, and pretending otherwise was becoming impossible. The confession hung between them. Amanda felt her pulse quicken. She asked why he was telling her this. Charles said because Emma had asked him if the scared lady was okay, and he'd realized he wanted to know too. Not as her boss, but as someone who cared. He said he'd spent 7 years building walls, protecting himself and Emma from anything that could hurt them. But watching Amanda with his daughter tonight, seeing how gentle she was, how easily Emma had trusted her, something in him had cracked open. Amanda told him about growing up poor, about her mother working 3 jobs, about learning early that the world didn't give you anything just because you deserved it, about fighting for every inch of ground she'd gained. She said she understood about walls, about protection, about being afraid to want things because wanting made you vulnerable. Charles listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said he'd been alone for a long time, that he'd convinced himself he preferred it that way, but tonight, watching her with Emma, he'd realized how tired he was of being alone. Amanda's breath caught. She told him this was complicated, that people already thought she'd used him to get ahead, that if anything happened between them, it would only confirm their worst assumptions. Charles said he knew, that he'd been telling himself the same thing for days, but standing here now, he couldn't remember why any of it mattered. He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. The touch was feather-light, but it sent electricity down her spine. From the car, Emma stirred and called for her dad. The moment broke. Charles stepped back. He said he should get her home, but his eyes stayed on Amanda's face. Amanda told him goodnight and watched him drive away. On the subway ride to her apartment, she replayed every word, every look, every touch. She was in trouble. Real trouble. The kind that could derail everything she'd worked for. But she couldn't make herself regret it. The next week brought the meeting with the manufacturing client's representatives. Amanda's team had prepared for days, refining their analysis, building financial models, anticipating questions. The presentation was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the main conference room. Charles would be there. The executive team would be there. This was Amanda's chance to prove she deserved her position. That morning, Vanessa stopped by Amanda's desk. She said Charles wanted the presentation materials sent to his office for review. Amanda should email the file immediately. Amanda did as asked, then returned to her preparations. At 1:30, she arrived at the conference room early to set up. The client representatives were already there, along with Charles and several executives. Amanda opened her laptop, pulled up the presentation file, and felt her stomach drop. The file was empty. Blank slides, no content, nothing. Amanda's hands went cold. She clicked through the document again, certain she'd opened the wrong file. But no, this was the presentation she'd spent weeks building, and it was gone. The clients were settling into their seats. Charles was watching her from across the room. Amanda could feel panic rising in her throat. She had 2 choices: admit the file was corrupted and ask to reschedule, which would make her look incompetent, or trust herself. Amanda closed the laptop. She walked to the whiteboard at the front of the room and picked up a marker. She told the clients she was going to do something unconventional. Instead of presenting a polished slideshow, she was going to walk them through her thinking process, show them exactly how she'd arrived at her recommendations. Make this a conversation instead of a performance. Then she started drawing, diagrams, numbers, process flows. She talked them through the manufacturing analysis, the cost projections, the implementation timeline. She answered questions as they came, adjusting her calculations on the board in real time. Her hand moved steadily, her voice never wavering, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. 45 minutes later, she capped the marker. The whiteboard was covered in her handwriting, a visual map of the entire proposal. The room was silent. Then one of the client representatives started clapping. The others joined in. They said it was the most impressive presentation they'd seen in years. Raw, transparent, exactly what they needed. Amanda's legs felt weak. She managed to smile and thank them, to answer a few follow-up questions, to shake hands as they filed out. When the room finally cleared, only Charles remained. He asked what happened to her slides. Amanda told him the file had been corrupted. She didn't mention her suspicion that it hadn't been an accident. Charles crossed the room until he stood directly in front of her. He said what she'd done was remarkable. That most people would have fallen apart. That she'd turned a crisis into an opportunity. Amanda felt tears threatening and forced them back. She said she was just trying to survive. Charles shook his head. He said she was doing more than surviving. She was proving everyone wrong, including him. He'd thought he was giving her a chance, but she'd taken that chance and turned it into something undeniable. His hand came up to cup her cheek. Amanda leaned into the touch without thinking, her eyes closing. When she opened them, Charles was looking at her with an expression that made her chest ache. He told her he was sorry, for the rumors, for the pressure, for every way his decision had made her life harder. Amanda said she didn't want his apology. She wanted him to know she could handle this, handle anything. Charles said he already knew that. It was one of the things that terrified him about her. Then, before Amanda could ask what he meant, Charles pulled her close and wrapped his arms around her. The hug was firm and warm and unexpected. Amanda froze for a heartbeat, then let herself sink into it. Charles's voice was rough against her hair. He said he couldn't keep pretending he didn't care, that watching her present today, watching her handle that crisis with grace and intelligence, had broken something open in him. He was done fighting this. Amanda pulled back just enough to see his face. She asked what he was saying. Charles told her he didn't have the answer yet, but he knew he couldn't keep his distance anymore, that she'd gotten past every defense he'd built, and he wasn't sure he wanted them back. They stood there, wrapped in each other, the conference room quiet around them. Outside the windows, the city stretched away in all directions. Inside, something fragile and dangerous was taking shape. In the hallway beyond the glass wall, Vanessa stood frozen, her phone in her hand. She'd been coming to congratulate the clients, to play her role as the perfect assistant. Instead, she'd found this. Rage burned through her chest. She'd worked for Charles for 3 years. 3 years of perfect efficiency, of anticipating his needs, of making herself indispensable. She'd watched him close himself off from every woman who'd tried to get close. She'd been patient, believing that eventually he'd see her, that her loyalty would be rewarded. And then this girl had appeared. This nobody from nowhere with her cheap clothes and her borrowed confidence. Within days, Charles had looked at her the way he'd never looked at Vanessa. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. Vanessa lifted her phone and took a photo through the glass. Charles and Amanda, wrapped in each other's arms. Evidence, proof of what was really happening here. She didn't know yet how she'd use it, but she would. She'd make sure everyone knew the truth about Amanda's promotion, about why the poor little intern had risen so fast. Vanessa turned and walked away, her heels clicking precisely against the floor, her mind already planning her next move. The investigation started quietly. Amanda first heard about it from Derek, who cornered her in the break room 3 days after her presentation. He said IT had been asking questions about file access logs, about who had permission to edit the shared drive where the presentation materials were stored. Amanda's coffee went cold in her hands. She asked why IT would care about that. Derek shrugged, but his eyes were curious. He said apparently someone had flagged unusual activity. Deletions. Tampering. He wondered aloud if Amanda had enemies she didn't know about. The word spread through the intern program like wildfire. By noon, everyone knew that Amanda's presentation crisis hadn't been an accident. By the end of the day, Vanessa's name was circulating in whispers. Amanda tried to focus on her work, but the tension in the building was palpable. People watched Vanessa differently now, watched Amanda differently too. The narrative was shifting, and Amanda wasn't sure if that made things better or worse. That evening, Charles called her into his office. Amanda had been there only once before, briefly, to drop off a report. Now she stood in front of his desk while he remained seated, his expression unreadable. The distance felt deliberate, professional, a reminder of the lines they'd crossed and shouldn't have. Charles told her the investigation had confirmed what they'd suspected. Vanessa had accessed Amanda's files the morning of the presentation and deleted the content. There was a clear digital trail. The evidence was undeniable. Amanda absorbed this without speaking. Part of her had known, but hearing it confirmed made it real in a way that settled like lead in her stomach. Charles said Vanessa had been terminated, effective immediately. Security had escorted her from the building an hour ago. Amanda asked why Vanessa had done it. Charles was quiet for a moment. Then he said Vanessa had worked for him for 3 years. She'd been efficient, loyal, professional. He'd never seen any indication of the jealousy that must have been building beneath the surface. He said people were good at hiding what they didn't want others to see. The words landed strangely. Amanda wondered if he was talking about Vanessa or himself. She asked what happened next. Charles leaned back in his chair. He said the company would issue a statement clarifying the situation, making it clear that Amanda's promotion had been based solely on merit, that any suggestion otherwise was unfounded. Amanda felt something twist in her chest. She told Charles that wouldn't fix anything. People would still believe what they wanted to believe. A company statement wouldn't change the fact that she was the poor intern who'd somehow ended up in a leadership role, who'd somehow caught the CEO's attention. The rumors would just morph into something new. Charles's jaw tightened. He asked what she wanted him to do. Amanda said she didn't know. That maybe nothing could be done. That maybe this was just the cost of being somewhere she didn't belong. The words came out more defeated than she'd intended. Charles stood abruptly, moved around the desk. For a moment, Amanda thought he might reach for her again, the way he had in the conference room, but he stopped himself, maintaining the careful distance. He told her she belonged here more than anyone, that she'd proven it a dozen times over, that anyone who couldn't see that was blind. Amanda looked at him and felt something crack inside her. She said she was tired of fighting, tired of proving herself, tired of feeling like every success came with a hidden cost she hadn't agreed to pay. She said she was going to resign. It was the only way to stop the speculation, to end the whispers. She could finish her degree, find something else, start over somewhere that didn't feel like walking through a minefield. Charles went very still. He asked if that was really what she wanted. Amanda told him she didn't know what she wanted anymore, except maybe to stop feeling like she was drowning. The silence stretched between them. Then Charles said something that surprised her. He said he understood, that if she needed to leave, he wouldn't stop her. But he asked her to wait, just a few days, give him a chance to fix this. Amanda asked how he planned to do that. Charles said he didn't know yet, but he'd figure something out. 2 days later, Amanda was sitting in the small park near her apartment when her phone rang. Charles. She'd been avoiding his calls, not ready to face whatever conversation was coming, but something made her answer this time. Charles asked where she was. His voice was urgent in a way she'd never heard before, Amanda told him. He said he was sending a car. She should come to the office immediately. There was something she needed to see. 20 minutes later, Amanda walked into Westbrook Industries to find the main conference room packed with people. Employees, executives, journalists with cameras. The energy in the room was electric and strange. Charles stood at the front, dressed in a dark suit, his expression serious. When he saw Amanda in the doorway, something in his face softened. He gestured for her to come forward. Amanda's legs felt unsteady as she made her way through the crowd. People turned to watch her, and she couldn't read their expressions. Charles waited until she reached the front of the room. Then he addressed the crowd. He said he'd called this meeting because there were things that needed to be said publicly, clearly, without room for misinterpretation. He explained Amanda's role in the manufacturing project. He showed financial projections, client testimonials, concrete evidence of the value she'd brought to the company. He detailed her qualifications, her academic record, the competitive process that had led to her internship. He made it impossible to deny that she'd earned every opportunity she'd been given. The room was silent. Amanda felt exposed and protected at the same time, standing there while Charles systematically dismantled every rumor, every whispered accusation. Then Charles said there was one more thing people needed to know. He looked directly at Amanda. His voice was steady, but she could see something vulnerable in his eyes. He said he'd spent 7 years building this company. 7 years putting everything into his work because work was safe, predictable. Work couldn't leave you. But somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten that companies weren't built by one person alone. That success meant nothing if you had no one to share it with. He said meeting Amanda had reminded him of that, watching her fight for every inch of ground, seeing her care for his daughter with a gentleness that asked for nothing in return, learning what real courage looked like. The crowd shifted, murmuring. Amanda's heart was hammering so hard she thought everyone must be able to hear it. Charles knelt down on one knee. The murmuring stopped. The room went absolutely silent. He pulled a small box from his jacket pocket and opened it. The ring inside caught the light, simple and beautiful. Charles said he knew this was unconventional, that they barely knew each other, that people would have opinions about the timing, the circumstances, the wisdom of what he was about to ask. He said he didn't care. He told Amanda that she'd gotten past every wall he'd built, that his daughter adored her, that he'd fallen for her the moment he saw her walk into that building with her head held high, refusing to let one moment of humiliation define her. He said he wanted her in his life, in Emma's life, not as an employee or a project leader, but as a partner, as family. He asked if she would marry him. Amanda couldn't breathe. The room swam around her. This was insane. Impossible. Everything she'd been afraid of and everything she hadn't known she wanted, all at once. Charles knelt there, patient, waiting. His eyes never left her face. Amanda thought about all the reasons to say no. The practicality, the scandal, the way this would confirm everyone's worst assumptions about how she'd gotten where she was. Then she thought about Emma's small hand in hers, sharing a granola bar, about Charles's arms around her in the conference room, about the way he looked at her like she was brave instead of broken. She thought about the girl who'd had her skirt blown up by the wind and had chosen to walk forward anyway. Amanda said yes. The room exploded. Applause. Shocked laughter. Camera flashes. Charles stood and slid the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms while chaos erupted around them. Amanda buried her face in his shoulder and let herself feel it. The fear. The joy. The absolute terror of choosing something just because she wanted it. Charles whispered in her ear that he loved her, that he'd figure out how to prove it every day for the rest of their lives. Amanda told him she loved him too, that he was completely insane, that she couldn't believe she'd said yes. Charles laughed, and the sound was light and free in a way she'd never heard from him before. The crowd pressed in with congratulations, questions, camera phones recording every second. Someone asked about Emma. Charles said his daughter already knew. That, in fact, Emma had helped pick out the ring, that she was at home with a babysitter, probably bouncing off the walls waiting to hear what Amanda had said. The thought of that little girl's excitement made Amanda's eyes sting with tears. Later, after the chaos had died down and the journalists had left, after the employees had filtered back to their desks with something new to talk about, Charles and Amanda stood alone in his office. He asked if she was okay, if he'd pushed too hard, moved too fast. Amanda told him it was the most terrifying thing anyone had ever asked her to do, that she had no idea how they were going to make this work, that people would probably never stop talking. Charles said he knew, that he was terrified too. Then Amanda smiled. She said she supposed they'd just have to figure it out together. 3 weeks later, they threw an engagement party at Charles's penthouse. Emma wore a purple dress she'd picked out herself and insisted on showing every guest the ring Amanda wore. The little girl introduced Amanda as her new mom to anyone who would listen, and Amanda's heart broke and healed a little more each time. The party was full of colleagues, clients, a few brave journalists. Derek was there, looking uncomfortable but sincere when he congratulated them. Several of the other interns came too. Their attitudes noticeably shifted now that the truth was public. Amanda stood on the balcony, looking out over the city, when Charles found her. He wrapped his arms around her waist from behind and rested his chin on her shoulder. He asked what she was thinking about. Amanda said she was thinking about wind, about how one random gust on one random morning had changed everything, about how humiliation had somehow turned into opportunity, about how the worst moment of her life had led directly to the best. Charles said he thought about that morning too, about seeing her across the street, about the choice to notice her, to remember her, to give her a chance he probably shouldn't have. Amanda turned in his arms. She said she was glad he'd broken his own rules. Charles kissed her, gentle and sure. When they pulled apart, Emma was standing in the doorway, grinning. The little girl asked if they were being gross again. Amanda laughed and held out her hand. Emma ran over and wedged herself between them, wrapping her arms around both their waists. They stood there together, the three of them, while the party continued behind them and the city sparkled below. A family built from accidents and courage and the decision to stop running from what scared them most. The wind that had once lifted Amanda's dress now seemed like a gift, a moment of chaos that had rearranged the world into something better than either of them had known to hope for.